Hello, everybody. My name is Kent Bai, and I'm going to be talking around the lessons learned from immersive storytelling. So I've been doing the Voices of VR podcast since the May of 2014, and I've published over 1,700 episodes now, and about one-third of that covered, so over 600 episodes have been around immersive storytelling specifically. So I can show you a graphic here of over 100 immersive stories that I've seen over the last decade, and most of you haven't had a chance to see these because they're only at festivals like Sundance, Tribeca, South by Southwest, Venice Immersive, and IFA Lab, and other regional festivals. And there's some here at Stereopsia, and now United XR as well, but it's something that has been relatively overlooked by the immersive industry, as well as not been very well distributed. So I've gone to a lot of these different festivals and kind of kept track to see what's happening with these experiences. Now, if I show you a list of different movies that I've seen that have had some impact on me, you might be able to discern different aspects of like things that you've also seen, and you may know what that means. And so there's a way that we take these media artifacts as a way of expressing our identity, but also connecting to each other. And this is something that is going to be happening in the future with XR, but isn't quite there yet just because they're not mass distributed. So there's not this sort of shared context that we have from immersive stories. But I suspect that we're going to get there as we go into this next phase. So I'm going to be talking around some of the lessons learned from all these different experiences that I've been watching and documenting, and I think it's some of the most innovative and creative innovations that are happening that the artists are kind of giving us a sense of where things are going here in the future. So I'm excited to kind of dive in today to these 5 main areas. First of all, presence is an interdisciplinary portal, philosophical paradigm shift to process. We are at the beginning of a new cycle. Artists reflect the current zeitgeist, and we can imagine futures that we want to create. So these are the things that we're going to be covering today. So first up, presence is an interdisciplinary portal. I'm going to share 4 different experiences that I just had at IFA Lab. This is called In 36,000 Ways, where you walk into a room, there's a bunch of shrapnel that's hanging from the ceiling. You walk up to a certain place, you pick up a piece of shrapnel, and you put on some headphones, and boom, all the lights go down, and you start to hear your heartbeat. There's a camera that's measuring your face and getting your heartbeat, and there's a haptic experience of a butt kicker underneath, so you feel your heartbeat as you're standing there, and you learn in that moment that this is what modern-day warfare looks like, with missiles that drop and explode up to 36,000 pieces of shrapnel that go up to 500 meters and will kill anybody in that radius. So it's an extremely powerful piece. Then there's a piece called Under the Same Sky, which was an immersive journalism piece that was documenting all the different horrors and humanitarian violations that are happening in Gaza. And I've seen a lot of different images, and there's something different than spending 38 minutes immersed into a place to kind of get a much deeper context as to what's happening. And for something completely different, there's a piece called The Lesbian Simulator, which is an immersive interactive piece where you get to participate in the variety of different things that in lesbian culture. You get to choose your identity, you go on a date, you get to come out of the closet where you have to say, I am gay, while you're in VR, while it's kind of paying attention to what that feels like when you're in an immersive experience in a public space. And it's a really amazing piece that both explores some of the homophobia that's happening, but also the joyful pride aspects of being a lesbian. And then finally, there's a piece called Handle with Care, which is 45 people come into a theater, there's a box, and then it says, the performance starts when everyone has had time to read this, and one of you opens the box. And inside the box, there's instructions where everybody in the room becomes a part of the performance, and it's completely different every time. So each of these are radically different types of experiences, but they're all under the same umbrella of immersive nonfiction at IFA Lab. And so in this talk, I'll be starting to start with how do we start to make sense of all these different disciplines and all these different qualities of presence that kind of tie these things together. So I'm going to talk about active presence, mental, social presence, emotional presence, and embodied and environmental presence. So there's each of these different design disciplines. So there's the video game tradition that's all about agency and interactivity, expressing your will. That's about active presence. Then you look at the abstractions of language with literature and social media and communicating with each other and having emergent social dynamics, and also the internet. And you also have the emotional presence, which is more of the cinematic tradition, which is film that is able to control the time, and then you have music and lighting, and it sort of has this consonance and dissonance cycles that really move your emotions. And finally, we have embodied and environmental presence, which is using things like architecture, theater, dance, and now virtual and augmented reality to start to modulate your sensory experience. So these are all design disciplines, and most of the different experiences I'm seeing are coming from a center of gravity. They're starting from one of this. So if it's a game, they might start with the interactions. If it's more of a world, it's starting with the kind of the world that they're starting, or if they're coming from that architectural background. And then maybe they'll write a script first for film, and maybe they'll think around what kind of emergent social dynamics they want to have. So you can think of this as taking action, making choices, emotional immersion, and sensory experience. Now, when I first went to Oculus Connect 2004, we have Brendan Urbe on stage talking about presence. And so it's something I normally hear as like in sort of more Buddhist context, but it was like a tech CEO talking about this more phenomenological experience. And so Mel Slater has talked around different aspects of the place illusion and plausibility illusion. With place illusion, that you feel like you're in a place, but you're not. And the plausibility illusion is that you kind of believe that you're there, even though or you believe that's happening is real, even though you know it's not. So you have this sort of place illusion and plausibility illusion. And then in 2022, he added two extra things, which is the body ownership illusion, so the sense of embodiment. And then you have this co-presence illusion, so the social dimensions. But you can see that there's still not the fire element or the water element, which is the active and emotional presence. And so in 2008 to 2010, after I asked Richard Skarbez, hey, is there anybody that is doing this kind of presence research that has these kind of elemental approach? And he pointed me to Dustin Chertoff's work, which kind of, he was looking at experiential advertising, and he was arguing that we need to look at experiential advertising and branding and take some of those approaches and apply it to presence theory, which is sort of like we both came up with sort of the same approach. And so for Chertoff, he was saying active, cognitive, relational, affective, and sensory. If you look at some of the literature from 1999, you have act, think, relate, sense, and feel. And then in 2009, you have behavioral, intellectual, sensory, and affective. And again, I think they all sort of come back to this archetypal expression of active presence, mental, social presence, emotional presence, and embodied environmental presence. Each of these are all happening at the same time. It's like, it's also what you're focusing on, what's the center of gravity, and how you kind of mix all these elements together. And each of these kind of communication media have a center of gravity. And like video games is all about agency. And so you also have this kind of, each subsequent media is being informed by the previous, but you also have this blending and blurring between all these different modalities and design disciplines. And it's all through the human experience and presence. That presence ends up being this interdisciplinary portal. Okay, so philosophical paradigm shift into process. So I've seen a lot of themes in terms of the different types of projects, and there's kind of a shift from one mode of being to another mode of being, and I think I can be sort of summarized by this move from substance metaphysics to process and relational metaphysics, and I'll sort of explain what I mean by that. So I went to the Matrix at Cosm. I had an amazing experience, this very immersive experience of the Matrix, and it was the famous scene of the red pill, blue pill, and whether or not you're going to choose to stay in the existing reality or you're going to experience the Matrix by you can only understand the Matrix by experiencing it, by taking the red pill. And so you have this kind of dialectic of you see in the movie where they're actually in physical reality, but then there's a lot of the characters that are in the Matrix and they're in this kind of platonic realm of ideal forms that isn't the actual base reality. And so it sort of invokes a lot of these ideas from Plato where people are sitting in a cave and they're seeing the shadows on the wall and they're thinking that's the actual reality when the real reality is sort of out and above, up top. And this is kind of like ideas that Plato was talking about. And so you have this concept of like the space-time and beyond space-time, the non-spatial temporal realm. And this is the Flammarion picture where you see someone kind of peering out beyond the bounds of space-time to sort of peer into this kind of archetypal realm. So you have this dialectic between the platonic and physical world that's run its course throughout all of philosophy, as whether or not you're going to be idealist or materialist. These are two kind of fundamental, like, what's the baseline of the nature of reality? And then you have a kind of Descartes approach of saying, well, there's a mind-body split. So there's actually kind of like each substance have their own right, but they're kind of just a split between the mind and body. And this kind of dualism has pervaded the XR industry and all of philosophy and all of our culture. And so what I'm seeing with XR and immersive experiences is starting to try to break down this split. So you have the substance metaphysics where all of reality is made out of stuff and substance, and then you have physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, and then consciousness kind of magically emerges out of this kind of dead inert matter. So there's this basic philosophical question is where is consciousness? Is it emergent? Is it something that's fundamental from more of an idealist perspective, or is it more universal? It's like embedded into every bit of matter, more of a pan-psychic or pan-experientialist perspective. And so there's a philosophical paradigm shift from one mode of philosophy to the next, from sort of substance metaphysics into the process reality and process and potential. So instead of having this like model where everything is built upon physical stuff, you have this sense of like it's Heraclitus. You can only step in the you can't step in the same river twice, where everything is a dynamic flux and a flow, and it's a process and it's unfolding. And so it's our human experience. And so you're starting with the human experience and then modeling the world around it, rather than trying to make sense of what the human experience is based upon this kind of atomistic approach. And so I've done 5 different episodes now in process philosophy, diving into some of the leading scholars, and just recently with Andrew Davis in 1708. But in this, they're kind of like creating a new kind of idea of what, to solve the dualism from the mind and body. What Matt Siegel told me is that Whitehead turns it into a process. So you start in the mental pole, and it then gets manifested in the physical pole. So you can think of it as the quantum realm, and then kind of those possibilities, and then collapsing into an actuality. And so there's a number of different scholars like Ian McGilchrist, who's very inspired by process philosophy and his Matter with Things and Master and his Emissary. There's a whole gathering that happened in San Francisco that I watched virtually. And Michael Levin is how many people have heard of Michael Levin? I'm just curious. So Michael Levin is doing some really amazing radical stuff where he's basically creating xenobots, and he's creating these anomalies of like saying that there's ingressing minds, which ingressing mind is a term from Whitehead, where it's coming from the platonic realm into physical reality. And so he's seeing there's these causal patterns that go beyond what genetics and the environment is showing. And this is a paper he wrote for the McGilchrist conference. So in this platonic realm, he's saying that there's these patterns that are kind of coming into reality. And so he's sort of perhaps having some sort of empirical validation into this platonic realm. And so he's showing, well, maybe there's humans that are having this interface, maybe there's also plants, but also potentially AI. And so there's a number of papers of saying like there's data science as a part of machinic Neoplatonism or the Platonic representation hypothesis. So I think at this point it's too early to tell whether or not where this is going to go, but it's kind of an interesting way that AI and also XR is having this kind of idealism that's coming in right now. And in my discussion, which is my last episode that I just published with Andrew Davis, he's had a kind of an introductory text to Alfred North Whitehead's philosophy called Whitehead's Universe. It's coming out next year, so I got an early look and had a chance to talk to him about it. And so this kind of goes from one to the next. And again, a lot of the different projects that I see on immersive stories are going from one to the next. So from static things, noun entities, into happenings, action, verb entities, from a discrete individuality to active relations. It's often called process relational philosophy because it's emphasizing the relations. So it's going from separateness and independence into relationality and interdependence. A lot of projects are showing the deeper contextual relations that you can only get into an immersive experience. And things from service level change to fundamental change, fixity and stability to innovation and novelty, passivity, indifference to activity and participation, and from being and being static into like the becoming and the dynamic flux. So, when you look at the Platonic world into the physical world, you can also look at it from Aristotle had from the fire, air, water, and earth. And so you can look at these different qualities of these are like biometric things that are being radiated from your body, like behaviors, intentions, actions, movements, and creations and engagement, your mental thoughts, cognitive processes, cognitive load, social presence, and predicted expectations, your sensory input, stress, arousal, physiological reactions, eye gaze, attention, body language, muscle fatigue, and then your affective state, emotional sentiment, facial expressions, and micro-expressions. So on the one hand, we're radiating all this information out, and then all the AI and algorithm is going to try to see that and discern out these patterns of your identity. So there's threats to our privacy, but this could also be fed into immersive stories to kind of tune it to be very directed to what type of experiences that you want to have. So just, there's mental models of reality and sensory experience. So there's a different kind of ways that you can start to understand Whitehead's philosophy coming in to the possibilities and to the actualities. And there's a predictive coding theory of neuroscience, which is also kind of the same idea of predictions and your experience. And then taking action, making choices, sensory experience, and emotional immersion. There's the perception, decision, loop, action loop that Frank Steinecke presented at IEEE in 2001 that shows how XR is at each level of this perceptual, cognitive, and action level is interfacing and interacting with it in some way. And when you look at Whitehead's concept of concrescence, it can be very complicated. And there is a great talk with Matt Siegel, who's trying to describe different aspects of the many become one and increase by one. And my conversation with Andrew Davis had a little bit of conceptual breakthrough is that you can just look at the human experience where you're inheriting the past, that's the physical pole, you're anticipating the future, the possibilities, the mental pole, and then in the moment you're taking action or you're receiving a story, and so you're kind of cutting off the decisions, limiting the possibilities, and then all of that is being kind of synthesized by our emotions. We're feeling the present, grasping and sensing, and that's what Whitehead calls prehension. So this is, in a sense, what kind of Whitehead's process philosophy is doing, and so I wanted to sort of explain that through the lens of presence to kind of get this sense of like, if we're going to have a philosophical foundation of experiential design, then this is a philosophy that really centers experience. And you can look at the conversation I had with Andrew Davis to dive into much more detail, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more deeper elaboration for a quick 5-minute overview of process philosophy. Okay, we are at the beginning of a new cycle. So since 2009, I've done 250 interviews with some of the top astrologers in the world in a sort of vaulted, hidden, esoteric past that has been hidden. But I've done a lot of interviews, I've written my own astrology software, and Richard Tarnas's book, Cosmos and Psyche, basically maps out the archetypal dynamics of history. And so you can look into the past to be able to understand the different quality of the moment, but also project that into the future. And that's how I got into VR, as I saw some of his predictions that was happening between the Uranus square Pluto. I was like, this is going to be revelatory new technology, and I got in it because I wanted to document how this was going to change all of humanity. So I wrote an article in 2017 making some predictions where I was talking about these deeper archetypal cycles of virtual reality, and I said that it's difficult to predict when VR is going to achieve this phase of mass ubiquity, and I suspect that immersive and ambient computing technologies will reach a level of maturity in mass ubiquity at either 8 more years in coincidence with the first exact alignments of Saturn-Neptune in the Uranus-Pluto trine in the summer of 2025, and also runs into 2026. Or it could be in another 28 years when Uranus opposes Pluto in 2045. So as I look at that, so just for context, there's kind of different phases of like new moon, first quarter square, full moon, third quarter square. You can draw a map to see where these two come into quadrilateral alignment to come up with these dates. And so you have, you can basically align different dates, and then basically you can see if there's a story that emerges between those. So in 1989, you have the internet that came out. You also have the Game Boy. And then the first quarter square was when the Matrix came out, and you have the BlackBerry. And so the seeds were planted in 1980 with the internet, and then sort of Saturn was the sort of limits the technology that's real, but also Neptune is blasting into other realms of realities that are kind of these portals of escape. So the blurring and blending of the boundaries between when you're at work and when you're at home. And then 2007 is the iPhone. So that's the moment where this kind of, we're all addicted to our smartphones, and that's the thing that's kind of dictating all of our lives today. And then you have VR and AR that's being launched between the same window, all these major VR and AR devices. And now we have, at this moment, this level of maturity where we have both smart glasses from Meta, we have Android XR, Vision OS, Valve, and also Snap spectacles. And you see this as an antidote to the smartphone. You have a lot of people talking around, we want to get off our smartphones and have these technologies that were more kind of ambient. But at the same time, this is a big question as to when's it going to go mainstream. I would say it's going to be either like 2033 or 2041. We're at the point of like planting seeds in the future, and we're at this crossroads right now as to whether or not we're going to have tech fascists that are going to continue to take over, or whether or not we're going to have more of a humanitarian approach and open source and open that are going to allow us to kind of be co-creators of our technology. And also have AI that's in this mix where all of the artificial intelligence was basically trained on internet from data from the internet. And now where AI is kind of where the Game Boy was in 1989. And so it's going to continue to go through these different phases. So this is just a way of kind of looking to see what kind of stories have emerged, but also to get a sense of like, we're at a new cycle. We're at the beginning of something. And it's an opportunity for us to really shape the future because we're at a turning point. Are we going to have walled gardens? Or are we going to go back to where the internet was in 1989 with this kind of way that's open and free and something that was truly inspiring, but now it's not at that point. And just as a note before we move on, If a Doc Lab was also started in 2007 as well as Something's New Frontier. And so artists reflect the current zeitgeist. So artists are kind of tuning into whatever is happening, and they're making art about that. So my method of, part of the reason why I want to talk to so many artists is because I get a sense of where things are at now and where they are heading. And so the theme this year was off the internet. So we've reflected upon the beginning of the internet, we're at a new phase, and people want to get off the internet. They want us to get away from, kind of reflecting on all the influence of what the internet has brought and find new ways of connecting and being present with each other. And so there was a really great essay called Individualism in a Dead Internet Age that starts to look at this essay. It's a playable essay, it's a video game that is kind of a nostalgic look at all the past, but remembering a time when the internet was actually free and open, that it was easy to distribute your own software. But now things are much more locked down. There's been the enshittification, everything's flooded with AI. So this is a piece of art that's really kind of reflecting on this, what we've lost, to where we're at now, looking back, and then seeing, okay, as we move forward, what kind of future do we want to create? Life needs internet. So there's a project that was basically collecting letters for 15 years of people saying, asking the question, how has the internet affected your daily life? And so there's this letter that I just want to read a passage. For me, the internet has recently become a hostile and oppressive space. And she says, the internet now does not invite me for a cup of coffee, but it hangs above me like a heavy storm cloud and follows my every step so it can pour on me in time. And no matter how much I try to run away from it in search of the true reality, I can't. It's as if the absence will destroy my entire reality, and at the same time, its existence is slowly destroying me. And now I live with all the wars and occupations, elections and coups, politicians and fascists, billionaires and influencers, artificial intelligence and bots, and inhumane humans ever so hanging over my head. So I think that sort of speaks to this moment that we're in, where we have to make this decision as to what kind of future we want to create. And there was an interview that I did, episode 1707, where Karim bin Alif has sort of he wrote a post on social media that went viral that was talking around how images of war that just gets mixed into our social media feeds in this kind of malaise, and that he wants to create immersive art that gets us present to the moment, to allow us to kind of break through the numbness, allow us to actually feel again. And then there's a piece called Deep Soup that was really encouraging this idea of design friction, meaning that all the technology is trying to erase all of the friction away from our lives. It's going to solve every problem, and basically you don't need other people, other humans. And so they're saying, well, we actually need to design for friction to actually encourage people to use and explore the messiness of relating with each other, because that's what makes us human. And so they're trying to kind of reinvigorate our ideas of connecting to each other as humans. And then this is a piece that actually won IFA Doc Lab, which is feedback, an anti-futurist musical that was, in the interview with Claudix. It's a piece that is reflecting on different ways that culture is feedbacking into ourselves, and it's a 360 video and CGI that has a vaporwave. In an interview with Claudix, she said something really interesting, that in the global south, the apocalypse has already happened. They've already had their culture destroyed by colonialism, and that the future has already been colonized. And so we need that, for their perspective as an anti-future music, as an they're futurists, that they want to actually sort of turn to their own indigenous roots, entheogens, and finding other ways to kind of modulate their consciousness. And I want to point to an interview I did with Emily M. Bender and Alex Hanna, because they're saying that all of AI is a con, it's a big bubble. There's a lot of stuff with artificial intelligence that is there's a lot of hallucinations that are still happening. And so how are we going to, is it in a bubble? And we're at the phase now where, what influence is AI going to be in the future? Are there going to be more sophisticated cognitive architectures? What kind of protections do we have? And so, I'd recommend listening to them, because I think they have also a lot of critiques that I think in this kind of AI hype have been overlooked. And then if you want to look into more conversations from Doc Lab, check out episode 1683 to I just published 22 hours of conversations. And finally, we can imagine the futures we want to create. We're in this kind of phase where a new beginning is happening, and we have a choice as to what direction we want to take the future. In MIT Open Doc Lab, they're starting to think around new modes of distribution, creating toolkits for independent immersive creators to have this network of kind of distribution for these stories to go out there. So they're doing a lot of work of kind of making a survey. There's some exciting shared reality initiative that may be funded by the CIIC from Doc Lab and another consortium that is trying to use immersive technology to reinvigorate democracy and to see if these different types of experiences can encourage people to become better and more active citizens. And then another final trend is that we have location-based entertainment that started with single experiences, but now we're having like group experiences. And so we have these community rituals of people coming together and being in relationship to each other. And so there's a lot of really exciting potentials for where we might be able to take this here in the future. So I guess my final thought is that there's been a lot of really amazing experiences that I've had a chance to see over the last decade. And it's something that I think has been relatively overlooked, but there's so much like source of inspiration for what the storytellers and artists have been doing in these experiences. And as I look at this image, there's so many different memories that come up. And I'm looking forward to a time in the future when you see an image like this and you'll be able to have an embodied memory of what I'm talking about. So yeah, and again, we are at the point where we can kind of dictate where the future is going to go in the future. And this is an opportunity to say, to think around over the next 10 to 16 years, what kind of things can we do now to sort of like get to these different mile markers to sort of tip the scales as to whether or not we're going to go down this path of walled gardens and control, or more openness, humanitarian openness, and really inviting the flourishing and participation for everybody. So thanks again for joining me here. Thank you.